Beer, at its most basic, is only three ingredients: hops, malt, and yeast. Beer's been around for thousands of years, at least as long as bread. In fact, beer and bread share the same ingredients. So when you think about the future of beer, what is there left to be discovered? Well, you have to look back. Some innovators are taking old methods of producing the three basic ingredients and applying new technologies to reimagine those ingredients. And they're exploring the idea of terroir, the theory that the local environment imparts a taste that is unique to the area in which it is produced.
Just like if you have a fine wine from California, or if you have a fine wine from New York State, that same grape, in this particular case, that same hop, it will taste different here in Dutchess County in the Hudson Valley than it will, say, in California or the West Coast. Hop farming was huge in New York. We were actually second in the world in hop production. You know, there was diseases and not understanding the integrated pest management on the hops, but really what killed hops was prohibition. The big advantage of supplying local to local craft breweries is they know where the source is. They know that the local source is fresh. The more you break down that hop plant, the more you break down the essential oils in that hop. They can have it right off the vine, immediately off the vine, and it's called wet hop. And that's immediately within 24 hours off that vine. It goes right into the water and the yeast and the malt and barley to make that fresh brewed beer. And they can come inspect their product. They can look at it. We're here growing throughout the year, and they can taste it, feel it, they can smell it. It's about being local.
Malt has been called the soul of beer. That sort of cereal, biscuit kind of flavor is coming from the malt. Other than water, the next largest ingredient used in the brewing process is malt.
Before we started Valley Malt, I was a home brewer for 10 years. When we started talking to brewers about brewing with local grains, they're like, that sounds like a really great idea, but where are you gonna get those grains malted? They need to be malted first. And that's really where we decided, instead of starting a brewery, let's start a malt house where we can bridge that gap between local farmers and local brewers and make a product with grains that are grown regionally.
Brewers were getting their malt pretty much from a catalog, and now they're getting their malt from people and from farms that they can connect with.
We are specifically targeting craft brewers, and we're trying to do unique things with them and have discussions with them about what we can do at our malt house and what we can do for them, instead of just pushing our products on them.
Malting, whether it's happening 500 ton batches or like we do here in 1 ton batches. So the difference in scale is enormous, but the process really is the same. You're taking a grain, you're steeping it, you're sprouting it, and then you're drying it down. And in that process, you're creating something that went from kind of inedible and not very flavorful to something that a brewer can make a beer out of. What we're able to do here is really parent that grain from seed all the way to the brewery. And literally we're, boot deep in the malt during the whole process, watching how it's growing, understanding that each batch is made specifically for the brewer that we're working with. So we're usually, when we finish a batch of malts, within a week that malt is sitting at the brewery ready to be used. A malt sensory is something that I've been doing now for about 6 months, and it's basically making like a little a tea And so we're able to evaluate any differences in flavor that might be coming from last year to this year.
These are all different variety trials from Cornell, from their wheat breeding program. We have a relationship with them where they sent us samples of all these different varieties of wheat that seem to be doing well here in the Northeast. And so we're going to micro malt them and evaluate them for flavor.
There really isn't a whole lot of research that we've been able to find out there that shows any kind of distinction between one year versus another. And part of that goes back to the idea of homogenizing and blending to a spec, which has happened in malting for, the last several decades. Hopefully, let's say 5 to 10 years from now, we might have enough evidence to say that there is something called terroir in grain, in malt, in beer. I think people can talk about that right now, but you really need to do more research and have more data to show that there actually are differences.
It's all around us. The yeast is kind of all around us. I mean, that's kind of a crazy thing about it. 99.9 something % of the beer that's made in the world today in modern brewing is done with a single yeast culture. And they're taking a pure culture in a kind of closed environment where you really only want that one yeast to do all the work of fermentation. We actually aren't adding any cultured yeast whatsoever. We are creating an environment, and that's the cool ship vessel itself, that allows natural inoculation of wild yeast bacteria that are resident in this area. There's a very specific overnight temperature and time of year that we target. So we really only brew these beers in November and December. That's kind of a piece of the recipe in a way, is exterior temperature. And if we see a storm coming through that's going to raise the temperature above that range, we'll cancel the brew the day before and wait it out. Take the wort from the kettle at the end of the boil, and instead of going through a closed heat exchanger, which we do for the rest of our beers, and we bypass the heat exchanger altogether and go right into the cool ship, so that we transfer boiling wort into this cooling vessel, and by that natural cooling in about an 18-hour period of time from the evening to the next morning, we're cooling the wort and inoculating it at the same time with local yeast and bacteria that's floating in the air. Once we get done with the cooling process and the inoculation has occurred of the wort, and it's full of yeast and bacteria, it's ready to ferment, that immediately goes into barrels. So it spends the rest of its life, which is anywhere from a year to 3 years of time, fermenting and aging in oak barrels. What we really want that barrel for is kind of a semi-porous aging vessel that allows some ingress of oxygen in and out, but not completely open. There's natural resident yeast all over the place. Will it produce a beer of good flavor? That's hard to say without going through the exercise of trying it. My belief would be no. Not everywhere could you make a spontaneously fermented beer that had good quality flavor. But for whatever reason, it works here in Portland. It works very well around the Brussels, Belgium area, and probably in a few other places around the world.
What's really crucial for crafts like brewing is that they continue to evolve to stay relevant. And brewers are evolving. Taking advantage of modern brewing technology and applying it to old world craft techniques seems to be the way forward for beer. What's past is prelude.